Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome to Serious Seerah Episode 3. This is the podcast for serious Muslims who love the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and want to discover the beautiful life model he left for us to follow. In today's class, we're going to discuss the following topics: Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a teenager and young man, the history of the Black Stone, the Prophet's marriage to Khadijah radiyallahu anha, the Prophet's love for Khadijah radiyallahu anha, the story of Zaid ibn Harithah, and finally, the story of Ali ibn Abi Talib radiyallahu anhuma. Stay tuned for Serious Seerah Episode 3. Now, in our last class, we spoke about the early childhood of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We discussed how he was born after his father died, and then how he was nursed by Halima Sa'diyah, who was a Bedouin. We spoke about how the tradition of the Arabs at that time was, those Arabs who lived in the city at that time, was to send their children with the Bedouins, the newly born children with the Bedouins, to be nursed and raised in the desert, so they can learn pure Arabic and also be exposed to a cleaner and more healthy environment. We spoke about how Halima Sa'diyah received many blessings after she began to care for him and nurse him. And even though the tradition at the time was for a wet nurse like Halima to nurse a child for 2 years and then return the child to their mother, Halima insisted on caring for Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam for an extra 2 years, and so he wound up staying with her for a total of 4 years. Then he returned to his mother, who was named Amina. He returned to his mother when he was about 4 or 5 years old, but she died about 2 years later. And then his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, took him under his care. And then also Abdul Muttalib died about 2 years after that. And from that point on, Prophet Muhammad SAW was raised by his uncle Abu Talib from the age of 8 on to adulthood. So we also discussed how some of the scholars mentioned that these tragedies helped prepare Prophet Muhammad SAW for having a softer heart for people, for caring for people who were weaker, who were part of the weaker part of society, such as orphans and widows. And we saw how that was part of his character. We haven't seen it yet, but you will see, inshallah, how that was part of his character when he got older. And also that Prophet Muhammad SAW at this time, he was as a young man, he was a shepherd, and we spoke about how being a shepherd helped prepare him to lead people as an adult. And we also spoke about how, my guess was that he was probably a shepherd as a teenager, and Allah knows best. By the time he was in his early 20s, he was working for Khadijah radiyallahu anha, and we'll speak about that in a few minutes, inshallah. All the prophets were shepherds. We spoke about that also. And being a shepherd helped train the prophets for leading people and training them to care for people. We spoke about how sheep are very weak, and we have to face that they're pretty stupid animals. They do not run very fast. They don't always have horns. Some breeds of sheep do have horns, but most sheep do not have horns. They don't have any defenses. They're not very large animals. And on top of that, they're not very intelligent either. So they don't have any natural defenses like horses can run, cows or oxen, they have horns. Sheep really are just soft, fluffy males on legs. And so they're pretty much just up in the air for wolves and mountain lions or any other predators out there. And on top of that, like I said, they're not very intelligent. So if you leave sheep to their own defenses, they'll get swept away by rivers, walk off cliffs. So you need a shepherd to guide them away from harming themselves. So, and if you're not careful, a sheep will pretty much destroy themselves if you're not careful. So you need a shepherd to guide them. And this was preparation for Prophet Muhammad SAW and all the prophets for protecting and guiding their followers and keeping them from harming themselves with their own stupidity, and also protecting them from threats from the outside. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about Prophet Muhammad's life as a young man. And I'm sure you all heard this before, how he was known in Mecca as being so truthful that he had earned the nickname Al-Amin. Some say As-Sadiq Al-Amin, which means the trustworthy friend. Now, there was a time, in fact, when the Kaaba had been damaged after a flood. And so the people of Quraysh, the people of Mecca, they had to work to rebuild it. Now, after in the process of rebuilding it, they had to take the black stone out. And after rebuilding it, it was now time to bring the black stone back into it. And an argument arose between the four major tribes who would have the honor of bringing the black stone back into the Kaaba. And all of the tribes, they wanted to have the honor, and almost broke out into a scuffle or a little battle when one of the elders of Quraysh said, let's let the first man to walk through into our vicinity, let's let him decide. And this was their way of just leaving things to fate. And as it happened, as the story goes, the first person to walk through was Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. At the time, he was not a prophet yet. He was probably just in his early 20s or maybe his late teens, so he wasn't a prophet yet. Well, he hasn't received the message of prophethood yet, but still, this is an example of his ability to negotiate between different people and also to resolve differences, and also to act as a leader and to be as fair and to think outside the box to find solutions to major problems. And so we know the story. It's a very popular story. You probably have heard it before, but we'll just go over it very quickly. After you heard all of the arguments from the different clans of the Quraysh, these are the major clans, his decision or his way to resolve everything was he took off his cloak, he put the black stone on top of the cloak and had a representative from each clan lift up a corner of the cloak and carry the black stone back into the Kaaba, and then he set it back into his place by himself, and that resolved the differences and kept everyone from descending into warfare or into battle. Now, before we go too much further, let's talk a little bit about the history of the black stone, Hajar al-Aswad. Now, some people say it was a meteorite, and Allah knows best, but what we do know from the authentic hadith was that Allah did send the black stone down from the heavens, or from the sky basically, so it fell from the sky. Initially, it was all white, but the sins of man turned it black, and that is how it is now. Now, I've heard many stories about the black stone myself, and I don't have proof about all of them. So, we'll go into a little bit, but I'm not going to dwell on the unconfirmed stories too much, but I'm just going to bring them out there so you have some references, inshallah. You might be wondering, what is the significance of the black stone? Why is it there? Now, one of the stories that I've heard is that it came down during the time of Prophet Adam alayhi salam, and that it was like a marker for the first place of prayer, and Allah knows best about that one. And there's also a story in the Bible about, I believe it's Prophet Jacob, Jonah. I can't remember the Bible story, but at one point in time, he established a place of worship, and I've heard some Muslims say that this place where Yaqub established was actually the Kaaba. I'm sorry, not the Kaaba, but the black stone. And later on, Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam and his son Ismail, we do know that they built the Kaaba around the black stone. And Allah knows best if any of these stories of these other prophets are absolutely true, and Allah knows best about those things. Now, obviously, we do not worship the black stone. You'll hear some anti-Muslims or enemies of Islam saying that Muslims worship the black stone. We do not worship the black stone. The black stone is the creation of Allah. We do not worship the creation. At best, it is something like the moon and the sun. It is a symbol that Allah has given to us. It is a creation of Allah that we can use to reflect on the power of Allah and the might of Allah. But we do not worship the black stone. That should be very obvious. Remember, it is a creation of Allah. There is no worshiping the creation. We only worship the Creator. It was just a stone sent down by Allah for reasons that only Allah knows. Now, whether the black stone is there or not, whether it exists or not, if it disappeared off the face of the earth tomorrow, we will still continue to worship Allah. That doesn't change. In fact, there was a time, many years after the death of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, when an Ismaili Shiite group invaded Mecca and actually destroyed a portion of the Kaaba and stole the black stone. They stole the black stone and they held it hostage in an area that we now know of as Bahrain. They held it hostage for like 20 years, over 20 years. But during this time, the Muslims didn't change their Qibla to Bahrain. They continued to, pray towards the direction of the Qibla in Mecca, towards the Kaaba. This is proof that, the black stone is not worshipped. So when you hear these stories of people try to say things about Islam, just know that this is just more anti-Islam propaganda that people will bring up. I mean, you're talking about people who worship crosses, talking about us worshiping the stone or stuff at all. We don't do that, and this has nothing to do with it. The black stone is a symbol of Allah, and only Allah. When I say a symbol placed by Allah, not that it represents Allah. It does not represent Allah. It is a creation of Allah, just like the sun and the moon and the ocean, something we can reflect on the majesty of Allah. That Allah sent down the stone many years ago, many centuries ago, eons ago, and is still around to this day by the mercy of Allah. In fact, and some more history about the black stone is that long before the Ismaili group, which were called the Qanatins, I believe. I can't remember the actual name, but they're Ismaili Shiite group, and I'm going into all the different multitude of Shiite groups out there, but the Ismailis is just one more group among groups of the Shiites. Long before that, there was a war between Abdullah ibn Zubair, who was the son of the great Sahaba Zubair ibn al-Awwam. There was a war between him and Yazid ibn Muawiyah. Muawiyah was a companion of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and Muawiyah did have a conflict with Ali, and eventually Muawiyah wound up becoming the Khalifa or the leader of the Muslim world. Before Muawiyah died, he appointed his son Yazid as the next Khalifa, and this began the process of monarchical or hereditary inheritance of the Khalifa. And from the time of Muawiyah, he passed the leadership of the Caliphate to his son Yazid, and from that point on, the Caliphate had been hereditarily transferred from father to son, or at least within families from that point on. And he did begin that trend, and that is between him and Allah. But at this point in time, this was the beginning of the Umayyad dynasty. Muawiyah passing on the title of Khalifa to his son Yazid, who was not the most deserving person to receive the Caliphate. We can argue that Muawiyah at least was a Sahaba. He was a companion of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Definitely Ali deserved it more than Muawiyah, but Muawiyah was at least still a companion and even a scribe of the Quran. He wrote down the Quran during the lifetime of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Yazid, however, did not have. There were many people who were more deserving of the Caliphate than Yazid. And one of these people was Abdullah ibn Zubair, who was a son of a Sahaba. Zubair ibn Awam was one of the 10 Sahabas promised paradise by Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. He was one of the early Muhajirun, one of the early people to accept Islam very early on in Mecca before the Hijrah. So Abdullah ibn Zubair definitely had more right to the Caliphate than Yazid. The war broke out between them and the Umayyad army, Yazid's army. They laid siege on Mecca. Abdullah ibn Zubair, he had control of Mecca. They laid siege on Mecca, and they were launching stones from the hills around Mecca. Remember, Mecca is a valley, set in between, surrounded by a bunch of mountains and hills. And so Yazid's army set up catapults around the Kaaba and around the city of Mecca, and were launching huge boulders into Mecca, and some of these boulders destroyed the Kaaba and also cracked the black stone. Eventually, the army had to pull back because of the oncoming Hajj season, so the army had to pull back. And during this brief interlude of peace, Abdullah ibn Zubair used these silver bands to reconnect the black stone and put it back together. So just going to show this an example of the fact that the black stone is simply a creation of Allah. It is a sign that Allah has given to us, just like the sun, the moon, the stars, and all these other things that Allah has given to us, which are much grander than the black stone is, yet we don't worship them. So just don't worry about the things people say about Islam. So I've been saying about Islam, about Muslims worshiping the black stone, all that stuff. That's obviously not true. Once again, whether the stone is there or not, we will continue to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We'll still continue to face the Kaaba no matter what. That is the Qibla that Allah has set for us, and we'll continue that until the end of time, till the day of judgment. And that's just the end of the story there for the black stone. So the black stone, once again, is just a sign that Allah has given to us. Now back to the life of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. In his early 20s, we talked about how he was probably a young man during the whole dispute about replacing the stone back into the Kaaba. And we also spoke how he was a shepherd probably in his teens. It was definitely before he was hired by Khadijah. I'm going to get into that right now, actually. In his early 20s, he was hired by a wealthy widow named Khadijah bin Khuwaylid to manage her business. As I mentioned before, the Quraysh were well-established entrepreneurs. They made their living by acting like middlemen, and they transported goods between Syria to the north and Yemen to the south. And not what we know of the countries today as Syria and Yemen, but the area, basically Southern Arabia and Northern Arabia, if you want to put it like that. So when it was cold in the north, they would bring goods from Yemen to Syria. And when it was cold in Yemen in the south, they would bring goods from Syria down to Yemen. That was how the Quraysh made their business, how they were able to establish their tribe as the most honorable and most noble tribe in the Arabian Peninsula. And because of their connection to the Kaaba and their importance in the Hajj pilgrimage, they were protected from raids like everybody else were not protected, and they had to pretty much fear for their life. The Quraysh were able to establish themselves as very good businessmen, and they were insulated from many of the problems that other tribes had to deal with because of their connection to the Kaaba. And Khadijah, radiallahu anha, was one of those people who benefited from this status that the Quraysh had. And she had also built a thriving business. She had been married twice before. By the time she met Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, she had been married twice before. Now, she did not actually get involved in the trade herself. She wasn't going out there negotiating and haggling and stuff like that. Women didn't do that back then. Instead, she would hire men to work, for her and be her middleman. And Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was one of the men whom she hired for that. She had heard of his trustworthiness. Remember, he had been known as Al-Amin. And so she hired him to manage her business. And so he would accompany her caravans to Syria and do the trading from there. And this was not anything new to Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, because even as a child, he would accompany his uncle Abu Talib on trips to Syria as well. So he was familiar with trade. He was familiar with the land of Syria before this. So this is not anything new to him. It's not like he just, came into, she just hired him because he was trustworthy alone. He had experience in that field also. And the proof of it was that after she hired him on as her manager, as the manager of her business, on his first trip back from Syria, he had made her much more money than anyone else had before. And she always had to worry about people stealing her money or cheating her, or people trying to take advantage of a widow woman with all this money. People trying to take advantage of it. She didn't have to worry about that with Prophet Muhammad because he was trustworthy, and he brought her back much more money than anybody else had before. So she was impressed by his honesty, by his trustworthiness, and by the fact that he made her a good deal of money, coming back, alhamdulillah. So now she was impressed by this, and so she decided to make the proposal to him for marriage. And she had been approached by other people before, but she had turned them all down. And so he was the first person whom she had actually pursued for marriage that we know of, at least. And at the time, she was 40 years old, and Prophet Muhammad himself was 25 years old. So despite the fact that so many men trying to marry her, she turned them all down, and she sent a proposal to Prophet Muhammad, and he did accept her proposal, and alhamdulillah, they did get married. So now Prophet Muhammad did not have to worry about wealth anymore. So he did not have to worry about actually going out there and trying to earn a living, whether it's trying to build his own caravan business like the other Quraysh had done, or whether it was getting into agriculture or anything like that. He didn't have to worry about that anymore. His basic needs of financial needs were pretty much taken care of. And this is partially spoken of in Surah Al-Duha, which is Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والضحى والليل إذا سجى ما ودعك ربك وما قلى وللآخرة خير لك من الأولى. Now, the tafsir behind the surah, first of all, it came down many years later, but it came down many years later when there was a brief pause in the revelation, and Prophet Muhammad at the time, he was thinking that maybe Allah had abandoned him. He was concerned that the revelation had come down in a while, so he was wondering what was happening. And Allah sent this down as a comfort to him. And Allah swore by the morning brightness. Allah says, "Wadduha." Then he swears by the night as it comes into darkness. So Allah says, وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى. Allah says, by the morning brightness and by the night when it covers in darkness, Your Lord has not forsaken you, nor has he become upset with you. This is Allah speaking to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ma wadda'aka rabbuka wa ma qala wa lal akhiratu khayrun laka minal ula. So skip down to the verses in question. Later on in the 6th verse, Allah says, Alam yajidaka yatiman fa'awa. Allah says, didn't he find you as an orphan? Allah found Prophet Muhammad. When I say found, I don't mean that literally, but basically Prophet Muhammad was an orphan at first, but Allah gave him refuge. He gave him, even though his father died before he was born, and his mother died when he was just a young boy, and then his grandfather died a little bit after that, Allah still gave him someone, make sure he was taken care of by having him stay with his uncle Abu Talib. So no matter the fact that so many people in his life died, Allah still made sure the Prophet Muhammad was cared for. They still have family taking care of him. Then Allah says, وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَى. He found you lost and then he guided you. Now, Prophet Muhammad did not worship the idols before Angel Jibril came to him, but it is showing that Allah guided Prophet Muhammad to the prophethood of Islam. And then Allah says, وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى. He found you poor and he made you self-sufficient. So Prophet Muhammad before marrying Khadijah, he had problems with wealth, but afterwards, now he married Khadijah, wealth was no longer an issue. And it's deeper than that also, because it's not just pure physical wealth, it's also being satisfied with what he had. And that's something that Prophet Muhammad exhibited later on in his life and throughout his life also, that he was not someone going after wealth. He was not, there's so many hadiths and so many stories about the poverty that he experienced, about the difficulties he went through. And even when he was the prophet and when he was the ruler of Medina and the undisputed ruler of the Medina, people would come to him and give him gifts and he would turn around and give it away to somebody else right afterwards. So acquiring wealth was not an issue, something that Prophet Muhammad really cared about. So they're not necessarily saying that, suddenly he found himself rich, but basically saying that Allah is taking care of Prophet Muhammad throughout all the tragedies that he experienced in his life, despite the difficulties he had. Allah was always there taking care of him, making sure that his needs were taken care of, making sure that he was always had what he needed, and always never had to rely on anyone else except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's basically what the tafsir of that Surah Al-Duha is for. And a real quick note, notice at the beginning of that Surah Al-Duha, Allah swears by the morning brightness and by the nighttime when it becomes dark. Just an example, just a quick reminder is that Allah can swear by anything he wants. He can swear by the morning's brightness, swear by the night, swear by, time, when he says, wal asr, innal insana lafi khusr. He can swear by the sun, wa shamsi wa duhaha. Allah can swear by anything he wants to. But us as humans, we can only swear by Allah. So just something to acknowledge and keep in mind, that while Allah can swear by whatever he wants to, we can't say anything about that. We can't. Allah is the creator of all. He can swear by whatever he wants to, but us humans, we can only swear by Allah, nothing else. All right. So just keep that in mind, that we hear people. This is not a Tawheed or Aqidah class. Be careful about people swearing by their father or by certain prophets, whether it's by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam or by Prophet Isa alayhi salam. Whatever person or creation of Allah that people swear by, all that stuff is a form of shirk, and we have to be careful of that. As humans, we can only swear, as creations of Allah, we can only swear by Allah himself. Just a short little side there. Now, you may wonder, and many people may wonder, what is it with these two individuals, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Khadijah bin Khuwaylid? They were 15 years apart. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was 25 and she was 40 years old. What did they see in each other? Why did they get married? What was the attraction? This is in our time right now. We will see this as something, not strange, but it'll be kind of weird. It'd be kind of strange also for such a young man to marry a woman who was 40 years old. You think that he could have, he would marry somebody his age or younger. But why did he marry someone who was so much older than him? What was the reason behind it? And I've wondered about this myself. And from what I can conclude, and from all the evidence, it all seems to point to the same thing, is that quite simply, they just fell in love with each other. It's really just as simple as that. It is just one of those things when two people fall in love. I don't want to get too overly romantic or Hollywood about it, but all the evidence from the hadiths and from their marriage and from the relationship, these two people, Prophet Muhammad and Khadijah bin Khuwaylid, they just loved each other. They fell in love, and it happens. I mean, I know as Muslims we don't sometimes get too much into love because we don't want to be careful of the way Hollywood portrays it, and which often leads to premarital relationships and or sex outside of marriage and stuff like that. So we want to be careful of that often, and as Muslims. So oftentimes as Muslims we try to maybe avoid the subject of love or try to downplay it a little bit, and there is some validity in that and not being too Hollywood about it. But the fact is that we are humans, and humans have emotions. And one of the strongest emotions for humans is love. Another one is hate, and anger. But love is one of the strongest human emotions. And this is an example. This is one situation where two people, despite the difference in age, despite the, I won't say irregularity, but the fact that it was not a very common a common thing for two people so far apart to get married, so far apart in age to get married. It did happen, and it happens even in our time now. It's not very frequently, but it does happen. Two people just happen to fall in love, and that's just all there is to it. Somehow Allah put love between their hearts, and that is what happened. And all of us, all of us here are people. We're all humans. I'm sure that most of us, at some point in time of our lives, have experienced some sort of, I don't want to say irrational, but inexplicable love for another person. I don't mean your children or your mother or something like that. Love for someone of the opposite gender. It happens to pretty much anyone dealing in life. You fall in love with someone. Some may call it puppy love as a teenager or whatever you want to, but you do sometimes, all of us at some point in time, develop strong emotional feelings for another person. And this is what happened with Prophet Muhammad and Khadijah bin Khuwaylid. And, love is it's a deep topic. Sometimes it hurts, and sometimes it can be wonderful. Often leads to marriage, and alhamdulillah when it does. And sometimes it doesn't always lead to marriage. I have experienced it myself, and alhamdulillah I happen to marry my inexplicable love. But sometimes people fall head over heels for someone, and it doesn't quite work out the way they want it to. I on my website, I get a lot of emails about people asking, what can I make to make this person love me? I love this person, but he doesn't seem to respond. And these things happen. It just is, I don't want to get into the whole issue of, how to handle that type of situation when you love somebody or you have feelings for someone and those feelings are not reciprocated or they don't come back to you in the way that you expect. But just to let you know that it does happen. We are humans, and love is one of the feelings that Allah has given us, and there are many good reasons for it. But like all good things, there's also danger to it and bad to it as well if it's not understood and dealt with properly. So just giving you a little information here that when it comes to situations like this, it happens to people, and it happened from the same thing here. This is what happened to Prophet Muhammad and Khadijah. They fell in love. Now they were married for about 25 years. We'll talk about, her death later on when that time comes, inshallah. Now's not the time for it, however. But, they were married for about 25 years. And during this time, Khadijah radiallahu anha gave birth to 4 girls, and some say 2 boys, some say 1. One of the 2, if it was 2 boys, the names was Qasim and Abdullah. But some, I heard more evidence for just being Qasim, and Allah knows best. Now, Qasim was his first son, his first child, and we know the tradition for Muslims. We name, often fathers would take the kunya of they take a name of their first son, calling themselves Abu so and so. So my first son's name is Ibrahim. You'll call me Abu Ibrahim. If Prophet Muhammad, his first son was Qasim, they call him Abu Qasim. For instance, Bilal Phillips, his first child was Amina, and so he's often called Abu Amina Bilal Phillips. And this is just Arab tradition, and it's people, the father. I can speak as a father, most certainly. I like when people call me Abu Ibrahim, and it's a connection between me and my son, and that's doesn't mean I love Ibrahim more than my other 4 kids. Just the fact that, this is my first son, and it builds that connection between the father and son. And even, women can call themselves so-and-so, Ibrahim or Abdullah or whatever. And also it should be known, just to point of fact, that it's not permissible for Muslims to name their first child Qasim, because that was a kunya of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There's authentic hadith in which he forbade us from taking his kunya. We can give our children his name, so we can name your first child Muhammad and then call yourself Abu Muhammad, but we're not allowed to name our first child Qasim and then call ourselves Abu Qasim. That's Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's kunya, and it's reserved only for him. So if you have any children or any sons, or if you plan on having sons, or if you do have any sons, try not to name your first son Qasim. And my son is named Ibrahim because initially I actually wanted to name him Qasim, but when I found out this hadith, I had to we went to option number 2, which was Ibrahim. And so my first son's name is Ibrahim, whereas my second son, his name is Qasim. But I'm known as Abu Ibrahim, not Abu Qasim. In addition to Qasim, Prophet Muhammad also had 4 daughters: Fatima, Zainab, Ruqayya, and Kulthum. And all of his daughters died except for Fatima during the lifetime of Prophet Muhammad. They all grew up to adulthood, but they all died during his lifetime except for Fatima radiallahu anha. She died 6 months after he did. Just more evidence of the difficulty and the tragedy that occurred in Prophet Muhammad's life. He experienced a lot of difficulties. To have at least five children. No, he has 6 actually, because he had another son named Ibrahim from an Egyptian. I believe it was some people say it was a slave, some people say it was his wife, but she was Coptic. Not sure if she'd be accepted Islam or not, but her name was Maria al-Qubtiyya, Maria the Copt. She was a gift. He sent after the Hijrah, he moved to Medina. Prophet Muhammad there was a period of peace when there wasn't fighting between him and the Quraysh. He would send envoys to the different rulers around the land, and one of the envoys went to Egypt, inviting them to Islam. The Egyptian ruler, whoever it was at the time, did not accept it, but as a sign of goodwill, he sent back a slave, Maria, back to Prophet Muhammad as a sign of goodwill. And may sound misogynistic now, but that's the way things were back then. But so he sent a slave as a sign of goodwill to Prophet Muhammad, even though he didn't accept Islam. The king of Egypt at the time didn't accept Islam. Still, so Prophet Muhammad took her as his wife, and she had one child named Ibrahim, but Ibrahim died, I think, before the age of 2. And there's a lot more evidence, a lot more hadiths about that one. Abu Qasim, remember, died before he even became prophet. Qasim died before Prophet Muhammad became prophet, but Ibrahim died in Medina. So there's a lot more evidence on that one. And there's a lot of hadiths around the death of Qasim. Around the death of Ibrahim, his son Ibrahim, that is. But my point, I got off track, it was that Prophet Muhammad experienced a lot of tragedy. To have 6 children and see 5 of them die in your lifetime is a difficult thing for anyone. I mean, can you imagine that? So many of your children dying in your lifetime, but despite the fact that he lost so much of his family, this is just his children. We're not talking about other people whom he loved, like his companions, his uncles who died, his wife who died, so many other people who died in his lifetime, but it never changed his demeanor. He was just as kind in his, towards the end of his life as was during the beginning of his life. And it helps, inshallah, for us, all of us will deal with some sort of tragedy. May Allah protect us from these sorts of tragedies. But if they do happen, it is something to reflect upon how Prophet Muhammad dealt with so much more. And most of us don't have to deal with that kind of tragedy. Losing 5 out of 6 children is I can't imagine. It has to be a very difficult thing. So just keep that in mind when you go through your tragedies, inshallah, that Prophet Muhammad did have much worse. Now, we're just going to go back into some of the proof about Prophet Muhammad's love for Khadijah. As we spoke about how much he loved her. Now, even after she died, he still had a soft spot in his heart for her, even many years after she died. So she died around the 10th year that he became the prophet. And even at least another good 10, 13 years after that, he still had a soft spot for her. He still had love for her, and there's a hadith where Aisha radiallahu anha, one of his other wives, we all know who Aisha is, she asked him, I'm paraphrasing here, why did he care so much about her when she was an old woman, and now he's married to young Aisha. And Aisha, when Prophet Muhammad died, she was about 18, 19 years old. So this hadith, she's probably even younger than that, maybe somewhere between the age of 16 to 18, Allah knows best. So she was very young herself, and she asked her, why did he care about, his old woman who died, and why he's worrying so much about her? And Prophet Muhammad immediately rebuked her and said, don't say anything bad about her. Don't say anything negative about her, because she supported me when no one else did. Prophet Muhammad speaking, she supported him when no one else did. And we'll get into that, and you'll see how much support she gave him, inshallah. Soon, hopefully. And despite the fact, that when no one else believed in him, she believed in him. And she was the first believer, in fact. And we'll get into that very, very soon. She was the first believer. And in addition to that, she bore him children, except for the Coptic wife that we spoke about already, who had his son Ibrahim. Khadijah she had all of his children. And Aisha, despite the love that Prophet Muhammad had for her, he definitely did love her. There's a hadith, I don't want to get off point a little bit, but there's a hadith where I believe Amr ibn al-As asked Prophet Muhammad, who did he love most of all? And he said, Aisha, radiallahu anha. So he said his wife Aisha. Then he said, well, what about, he said, of course you're going to love your wife. He was thinking, Amr ibn al-As was like, of course you're going to love your wife more than anybody else. Well, what about the men? Who do you love amongst all the men? Then he said her father, who was Abu Bakr. And we'll get into that later on, inshallah. But it just shows that he did love Aisha now. He definitely did love her. And there are many hadiths showing his love for Aisha, radiallahu anha. But Khadijah had a special place in his heart. All of his children came from her, except for Ibrahim, and also the support that she gave him when he had no one else, came from her as well. And even after that, Prophet Muhammad, after she died, he would continue to send gifts to her family and her friends, even many years after she died. And this is another example of his love. I mean, we can go into the people can say things about Prophet Muhammad. Maybe he married her for money, he married her for status, whatever. If he had done all that, why would he continue to send her friends gifts even many years after she died? I mean, if he had just wanted to do it for money, I mean, why continue to send gifts? I mean, he had no reason to do so after that. He would have inherited everything she had, and there's no reason for him to continue doing that. But it wasn't any of that. It's just that he loved Khadijah so much that he was kind to her friends and family just because they were the friends of the woman whom he loved for almost half of his life. So that's something to think about there. Something serious to think about there. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about how after he married Khadijah, and one more thing I know I want to speak about. I lost track for a second there. People have brought up many reasons for his marriage to Khadijah. We talked about money. Prophet Muhammad never, throughout his life, before or after his prophethood, never showed an inclination to wanting to acquire wealth. He never seemed to have a desire for more wealth. Wealth would come to him, he would give it away. I mean, he was the ruler of Medina, and when the Muslims were really, in the beginning it was tough for the Muslims, but after a while the Muslims were pretty much kicking everybody's butt, pretty much. They were winning war after war, battle after battle, and they were pretty much unstoppable towards the end of the Prophet's life. And he could have acquired all the wealth he wanted, but he did not. Every wealth would come to him, he would give it away. So there was no inclination of him wanting wealth. If he wanted wealth, he had more than enough access to it where he could have taken all that he wanted to, if he wanted to. But that was not his reason. People may say that maybe he married her for desire, for nobility, for status. But remember, he came from the most honorable tribe in Mecca, the most honorable tribe in Arabia, and the most honorable clan within the most honorable tribe in Arabia. He was from the Hashim clan, which had the honor of caring for the pilgrims who came to the Kaaba. So given his intelligence and his ability to manage business, had he wanted to, Prophet Muhammad seriously wanted to, he could have easily been the head of his clan, maybe even the head of all of Mecca, had he just, sat around and played his cards right. He could have had all the nobility and status he wanted to. He was evidently a very good organizer, very intelligent person, very good at business. He could have easily just waited until his uncles died off, or just, exerted himself to the point where he became leader of all of Mecca if he just simply wanted status. He didn't have to marry someone for status. He could have easily gotten that on his own, just by the family he was born into and by his own natural abilities that Allah gave him. So there's no reason for him to marry Khadijah, for nobility, and there's no indication that he desired money. He married her because he loved her. It really is, as I mentioned before, it really is as simple as that. Sometimes it can be hard for people to wrap their heads around that, but that's really what it was, and Allah knows best. Now, after he did marry Khadijah, now he didn't have to worry so much about money. That is true. He married her. Money was less of an issue, and he began to spend more time contemplating about the situation around him. He began to withdraw. As he approached his mid-30s, so his age of 35, 36, he began to withdraw from regular society as much. He wasn't involved in society. Another indication that he really wasn't someone, hankering for status or position in society. People who want to get into politics usually start at a young age. So if he wanted to get into politics and handling the affairs of Quraysh and running Medina or running Mecca and stuff like that, he could have started at a much younger age. He had the money to really devote himself to, he had the money and the wealth and the time now. He could have devoted himself to simply trying to, take over the Hashim clan and then, run Mecca all he wanted, if he wanted to do that. But he didn't. Instead, he began to just become more contemplative and just, secluding himself away from other people except for his family. And he began to spend more time in the mountains surrounding Mecca and in the caves in the mountains surrounding Mecca, and trying to really focus. This is a time of spiritual awakening, so to speak, and Allah knows best how best to put this. Before we go too far, I want to speak about two young boys who came into his life around this time. The first one was Ali ibn Abi Talib. That was Prophet Muhammad's cousin. It was the son of his uncle Abu Talib, and Ali was roughly about 9 years old. When Ali was about 8-9 years old, his father Abu Talib ran into financial difficulties. Abu Talib was a very kind man. He, spent his money helping other people. He's also getting much older, so he couldn't be as involved in the trade business as he had been before. And so he ran into some financial troubles. And Ali was not the only son he had. He also had another son named Jafar, and he may have had others, but those I know too, definitely for sure. Ali and Jafar were both Abu Talib's sons, and they both wound up becoming Muslim later on. Jafar and Ali, that is. Now, during this time, Abu Talib had run into financial difficulties. Prophet Muhammad offered to care for Ali, as to take that extra burden off his hand. So that he was like, you had took care of me when I was a child, so let me help you now with this young man, with Ali, so that make it a little bit easier for you, because Prophet Muhammad had the extra wealth, he had the money, the time, and so he took Ali into his household, and Ali pretty much grew up with Prophet Muhammad from that point on. Until he got older. And we know, of course, that Ali wound up marrying his daughter Fatima, Prophet Muhammad's daughter Fatima. So it's a clear indication of the close connection of that family tie, right? The family ties right there. And Ali would also become the first male to accept Islam. However, at the time he accepted Islam, he was just a young boy. The first adult was Abu Bakr, and we'll get to that, inshallah. Don't know if we have time today, but we'll see. The other young man that came into his Prophet Muhammad's life was a young boy named Zaid ibn Harithah. Zaid ibn Harithah was not from Mecca. He was from a different tribe. I can't think of the name right now. But the point is that Khadijah went to, basically slavery existed at the time. And we're not going to get into the right or wrong of slavery. Just bear in mind that it did exist at the time. And so Khadijah bought Zaid ibn Harithah as a slave to more or less be like a companion to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And judging from this, I would be inclined to believe that Zaid came into that Prophet's household before Ali did, because if he had Ali, there was not much need for Khadijah to get to bring him a slave as a young boy slave to help bring the household or anything like that. So Khadijah brought Zaid ibn Harithah as a slave, and also as someone to help Prophet Muhammad through. He had lost his son not too long before that, and so this was something to try and cheer him up and help him because he did love children. So he got Zaid ibn Harithah into his household, but the thing was that Zaid ibn Harithah, we had to ask, how did he become a slave? How did he get on the market as a slave? His homeland, the city that he was from, the land he was from, it was invaded, and he was stolen away as a young boy as a slave and then sold on the open market. Eventually, he wound up in Khadijah's hand and wound up in the household of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so now after the war is over, his father, that is Zaid ibn Harithah's father and his uncle, they began to track down, their son, their boy. They're trying to track down what happened to him. And they go from place to place, follow leads here and there. And eventually they track him down to Mecca in the Prophet's household. So they come to the Prophet, and at that time he wasn't the Prophet yet, but they come to the Prophet and they ask him to buy Zaid back, because that's basically even though he was biologically their son and their family member, in order to bring him back, they had to pretty much pay him. They were prepared to pay Prophet Muhammad for whatever was required in order to bring Zaid back. Now, by this time, Zaid had probably been with Prophet Muhammad, I'm going to guess about 2 to 3 years. Allah knows best. I got to look up the exact amount of time. But he had been living with him for many years. But Prophet Muhammad, he didn't want the money, but he didn't want to make Zaid do anything he didn't want to do either. So rather than just accept the deal of the money for the boy, he said, well, let Zaid choose for himself. If he chooses to go with you, to go back home with you, then he can go with you. You don't have to give me any money. But if he wants to stay here, I'm not going to make him go. And so they asked Zaid, what did he prefer to do? And Zaid chose to stay with Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's how kind he was to him. And the father and the uncle, they were very surprised at this. So you rather stay here as a slave instead of come back home with your own family? You remember the family relations at that time were very strong. But Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had treated him so kindly, and he had grown to love him so much that he rather stayed in the palace of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Zaid ibn Harithah, of course, also eventually accepted Islam, and he died in the Battle of Mu'tah many years later. So during the time of the Hijrah, but after the Hijrah, it is. But the point is that Zaid preferred to stay with Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam than go back with his own family because of the kindness and the beauty and the love that he had for Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And after that encounter, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam then he basically freed Zaid, saying that he's not a slave, and he began to call him, he said that this is now my son. Basically called him Zaid ibn Muhammad. And from that point on, until Allah forbade that sort of adoption, Zaid ibn Harithah was known as Zaid ibn Muhammad. So Prophet Muhammad basically adopted Zaid as his son. And this helped Zaid in the fact he was no longer considered a slave in that society. The society was still corrupt, and people who were known as slaves had a much lower status. And so he called him Zaid ibn Muhammad, and he was known as Prophet's adopted son, or even as a son. And in that point of time, during that time of in Mecca before Islam came, when someone adopted you as their son or their daughter, you really, except for the biological part of it, you were treated as a son or daughter. Meaning you couldn't marry, an adopted son couldn't marry, their sister, even though there was no blood relation between them. They couldn't marry the daughter of their adopted father, because that's seen as something evil, because now they're considered like brother and sister. They would inherit from the father just like the other children would. They're really considered like their absolute children. And this is just part of the ignorance of the society at that time, because actually this is not really a good thing. This is basically breaking the ties of relations that Allah had established. And no matter how much love an adopted son has for his adopted father, or adopted father for his son, the truth is that the real relationship that Allah has set in place is that biological father and the biological son. That is a tie that Allah has established. And so remember, one of the worst things a Muslim can do is to break ties of relationship, family ties. One of the worst things they can do. And this sort of form of adoption, it does kind of sever that relationship, because it brings another person in as the father rather than the biological father. Whether there is emotional attachment there or not, the biological father and mother is the relationship that Allah has established, and that must be preserved. Even it's repeated over and over and over and again in the Quran, and it's emphasized in the Quran how important it is to honor and to respect our parents. Even if they don't accept Islam, we still have to respect them. Allah gives very specific details about inheritance between family members, and we cannot overemphasize how important family relationships is in Islam. And so for this reason, this form of adoption where someone pretty much throws off all of their family ties from the past and accept the family of someone else is not permissible in Islam. All right, so we have about 10 minutes left. If there are any questions, now would be a good time to discuss them, and it's up to you. If you have any questions about anything that happened so far or about any of the previous classes, so far we discussed, just going over, we mostly spend most of the time discussing the Prophet Muhammad's family, whether it was Khadijah, and then we went on to Zaid ibn Harithah, and then Ali ibn Abi Talib. We spoke a little bit about his early life before marriage, how he was known as a trustworthy person. Inshallah. So we covered quite a bit today. If you have any questions, now's a good time to ask them, inshallah. If not, then we also spoke about the black stone, the origin of the black stone, the significance of the black stone. Anything else we didn't really discuss today? Spoke a little bit about the Tafsir Surah Al-Duha. Spoke about the Prophet's children, about the kunya. All right. Any questions about any of those topics or anything else dealing with the life of Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? Either I must be a very, very good teacher or a very, very bad teacher. One or the other. For no one to have any questions so far. Okay, the question is, in Islam, is it allowed to raise a child that is an orphan and later that child marry one of your biological children? Fiqh question. Remember, the type of adoption that we have now in the United States and probably most other countries, where you can adopt a child and that child now becomes, according to the state, your actual child. That sort of thing is not allowed in Islam. It is, of course, permissible and recommended to care for an orphan. Now, how we work this around in today's society, I don't know. I mean, I think in some states have it where you can be a legal guardian for someone without actually adopting them. That is, I believe in the state of Georgia, there's definitely a law there where you can legally become someone's legal guardian. Yeah, like a foster parent in a way. Foster parenting, as it is in the United States, is kind of when a child is taken from a broken home and then put with another family, and it's kind of temporary, and the assumption is that eventually they'll go back. But they actually have another one where you can actually become a legal guardian through the courts for someone, until they're 18 years old, but you don't necessarily adopt them, so to speak, where they take on your last name and they're seen as your legal children, as your legal children. Allah knows best. I'm not a lawyer, but to answer your question though, if you raise a child in your household, let's say you take a child in as an orphan, and you don't go through the courts and make them your adopted child, and another thing about adopting children is that there are some really amazing tax credits for it. That's probably why people do it. I think the government gives like $13,000 for legally adopting a child. So, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. But the point is that if you take a child and you raise them as an orphan and raise them in your household, then yeah, I mean, as they get older, there's no reason, so long as they didn't nurse with the same mother. If you take a young child in, and let's say I adopt a young, 6-month-old baby boy, and I have a 1-year-old daughter right now, and my wife nurses both of them. And at that point in time, no, they can't get married because as they get older, they would have both nursed. My wife would nurse them both. And so, no, those two can't get married. But if I bring in, say, a 9-10-year-old boy and I have an 8-year-old daughter now also, and then 10 years later they want to get married, there's nothing wrong with them getting married. First of all, I wouldn't, they'll be considered milk brothers, so to speak. And so milk brother or sister as milk siblings, and so they can't get married. And I forgot the number of milkings. I think it used to be 10. It may have been lower, I think, than that. I don't quote me on the fiqh of how many nursings it takes for someone to become milk brothers, but I'm going to leave that to another time until I get more evidence on that one. But for certain, if they've been nursed, generally speaking, they can't get married. So, but if they just raise them up, then no, there's no problem with that. Evidence is with Ali and Fatima. Prophet Muhammad raised Ali from the age of 8 or 9 up until adulthood. And Ali married the Prophet's daughter Fatima. That was his biological daughter. Now, Prophet Muhammad never adopted Ali, but Ali lived in his household for, most of his childhood up until he became an adult. So there's evidence right there that it is permissible. And as a matter of fact, they were actually cousins. So they were Ali and Fatima were actually cousins, so they were actually, close enough related. But if you just bring a child into your home and you raise them up, then if there's no nursing, then there's no reason why they can't marry your child. Remember, we should not adopt children the legal way anyway, where they take on your name and everything else. And don't want to get too deep in that because I know there's a lot more to that than what I know. So I'm going to stop there where my knowledge is limited. And Allah knows best about whatever I just said. Wa yakum. All right. Any other questions? All right. Hopefully by next week, inshallah, we'll be able to get into the beginning of the revelation. And then we're going to see the importance of the Prophet's relationship with Khadijah, as well as the relationship with his uncle Abu Talib and how important they were. We're going to begin to see some of the enemies of Islam that first came about, Abu Lahab and Abu Jahl. And while I'm on this, I realized that I made an error before. I don't know, the last class before that, I said that Abu Jahl's real name was Aqil. I was wrong on that. His actual kunya was Abu Hakam, which means father of the wise. And Prophet after he became prophet and Abu Jahl exhibited his antagonism towards Islam, Prophet Muhammad nicknamed him Abu Jahl, means father of ignorance. So I said Aqil, I was wrong. Aqil also means like intelligent or wise, and I got my vocabulary mixed up. His name was actually Abu Hakam. So my mistake on that one. And I if I make mistakes and you recognize them, it's simple to point them out to me. Okay. Alhamdulillah, jazakallah khairan. Wa iyyakum. Any other questions? Okay. All right. Well, once again, my dear students, I thank you for coming out and for participating. Alhamdulillah, I hope this is beneficial for you as it was for me. Inshallah, next week hopefully we'll be getting more into the revelation, the beginning of the revelation, and that's hopefully it will be much more. We kind of skipped through the first 25, 30 years of the Prophet's life very, very quickly. You just took 3 classes, but now we're going to slow down a lot because there's much more evidence in the Quran and the Sunnah after the revelation came. There's much more material to cover because there's more evidence. Whereas before this, the evidence is kind of sketchy and it's not. We have to refer to it. The evidence and the sources of the Sirah before the prophets became the prophet. It's not as abundant as when after he became the prophet. And it's even more abundant after he makes the hijrah. But even in this 10 years, the 13 years that he was in Mecca, there's still a lot of information there. So inshallah, we'll get more into that. Inshallah, and that will slow down, and that will take some time to cover. All right. If there's nothing else, then we can close it out. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.